Okay, partisanship in elections. So this is a continuation of the development and the adaptation of the political parties. It's been updated in 2018 to reflect the election of Donald Trump. Partisanship in elections. Okay, so when you look at the history of which political party has held the White House, you'll see periods of maintaining elections. That's when a coalition of voters continue to vote for the same party, so the same party continues to win the presidency. Status quo is maintained. Generally, you're going to see this when you have low voter turnout or if people are complacent, people are happy. If people are happy and they're retrospectively voting, then you're going to see maintaining elections. The most obvious period of maintaining elections in our political history in the United States was from Lincoln to Hoover. During this time frame, you had the dominance of the Republican Party winning the White House. There is one instance in this timeline where a Democrat wins. So Wilson is able to win the election in 1912 because there is a very viable third-party candidate, Teddy Roosevelt, who splits the Republican coalition of support, and then the Republicans, not knowing whether to vote for Taft or vote for Teddy, end up in a situation where their votes are split and Wilson is able to win a plurality of the vote to take the White House. That's called a deviating election because it's a quick, brief change from what the supporters of the party that had maintained power has done. Right. Whenever we mark a period of party realignment, remember realignment is when the party is able to gain a new coalition of support based off of the promises that they've made. So they can actually switch voters from one political party to another. Generally, that's going to be marked by critical elections. So critical elections we're going to look at in the next couple of slides: 1800, 1828, 1860, 1896, and 1932. So we've seen some critical elections that will actually mark a period of realignment. Like, for example, Nixon was able to get Southern whites to give up supporting the Democrats because the Democrats had been the party of civil rights, and he was actually able to attract them or realign Southern whites to the Republican Party. And I'll get into that in the next few slides. All right, so let's just go through the political party eras. A lot of this is a review of what you had in U.S. history, so I'm not going to get into too many details, but these are going to be the historical periods in which a majority of voters cling to a party in power because that party was able to successfully translate promises into policies. All right, so the first party system we have the Hamiltonian Federalist, or the Federalist parties, or the Federalist Party. Obviously, this was the party that supported national government power, and their coalition was Northern voters whose economy was centered around business and industry. They were not the dominant party, however. This party era was dominated by the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans. They were the states' rights party. Their policy was more geared to supporting farmers or agricultural-based economies, smaller scale economies. Their coalition of support was the South and farmers. All right, but things were shook up in 1828. In 1828, the Democratic Republicans actually fell apart. And it was really because of this guy, Andrew Jackson. So Andrew Jackson broke off from the Democratic Republicans, never really was a true Democratic Republican, started his own political party, or a political party that was based on his policies and his promises of securing a vote for the common man or a non-property owner. So Jackson with Martin Van Buren established the Democrats. So this was the party, and their coalition again was the common man. They were really for states' rights and allowing for state sovereignty in the ability to choose whether or not a state was going to be a slave state or a free state. And very much supporters of slavery. The major competition for the Democrats at the time were the Whigs, and the Whigs, their platform would have looked more like the old Federalists, so national supremacy over the states' rights. So we go with a period of time of Democrats winning election after election, and then in 1860 we have the anti-slavery Republicans. So their coalition wasn't super well defined as far as, well, it wasn't large. It was defined in the fact that the coalition of support for the new Republicans were anti-slavery, strong national government over states' rights. Their coalition, even though it wasn't massive, it was enough to win the presidency. So Abraham Lincoln, okay, it was enough to win the presidency and electoral college votes for that, and it was enough to win majorities in Congress. But as you can see from this electoral college map, most people, a lot of people didn't really want Lincoln to be the president. So what you ended up with is you had a split of the different regions, and the election of Lincoln ended up being the catalyst for war. So the southern states had had enough. And that's kind of where the Republicans went for a couple of decades. So you have Republicans being anti-slavery through the Civil War. You have Republicans being the punishers of the South, the radical Republicans being the punishers of the South during Reconstruction. And that really defines the Republican Party. But then something happens in 1896 that kind of changes the course of the platform for the Republicans. So with slavery no longer a major issue for the Republicans because of the ratification of the 13th Amendment, Republicans start to define themselves more as the industrialist party. So in 1896, there is the election of McKinley. So McKinley's platform was pro-business. Their coalition of support were those in northern industrial states who supported things like gold standard-backed money and high tariffs to protect their industries from foreign competition. Okay, so that's really how the Republicans go for a while, and that's where they're getting a lot of their political support. So you can see in the northern industrial states, and they have a brief period where Teddy Roosevelt and Taft kind of made it a progressive party, or tried to make it a more progressive party, regulating businesses and putting in place laws against child labor, and putting in regulations against poor working conditions, and labor laws and labor unions start to pop up. But that's really kind of a brief period for the Republicans, because this era of the turn of the century, the Industrial Revolution Republicans, is the era that cements the long-term Republican support for free markets, low government regulation of businesses. This really kind of solidifies them as the laissez-faire party. And then you have this guy. Okay, so here's our next critical election. Okay, so Democrats under the leadership of FDR, FDR was able to align voters into a voting bloc called the New Deal Coalition. So anybody who was hurt by the effects of the Great Depression based off of the policies that FDR was promising on the campaign trail, it really appealed to a lot of people because a lot of people were hurting. So you had a lot of Southern Democrats were happy to hear FDR talking about agricultural subsidies. You had people who were members of labor unions liking the idea that FDR wanted to spend government money to get people back to work. People in urban areas liked him. Immigrants liked him. A lot of people liked him. So this kind of solidified the Democrats as the working man's party. So you had the Republicans as the laissez-faire party that kind of let the economy go to hell in a handbasket, which led up to the Great Depression. And so the Democrats came in and said, look, the Republicans as the industrialist party or the pro-business party, the laissez-faire, no government intervention in the economy party, got us into this mess. We Democrats, with our New Deal, are going to get you out of this mess. And we can debate over whether or not the New Deal actually ended the Great Depression, but whatever have you, the Great Depression, we recovered from the Great Depression under FDR. So Congress was able to dominate, Democrats were able to dominate Congress until 1994 because of this really strong New Deal coalition that was created by FDR and his New Deal policies. Now that New Deal coalition is going to start to break apart in the 1960s. So you can kind of see that the New Deal coalition is fractured. Now I'm going to tell you why. So without a really solid coalition of support, what we end up seeing now is that there's really a lack of long-term party dominance. When I was born, 1980, Carter, a Democrat, was finishing up his one and only term. Then it was Reagan, Republican, for 8 years. Then it was George H.W. Bush for 4 years. Then it was Bill Clinton, Democrat, for 8 years. Then it was George W. Bush for 8 years. And he was a Republican, obviously. And then it was Barack Obama, Democrat, 8 years. So we keep on going back and forth. So this has kind of been the trend. This is our new trend, is this lack of party dominance. And you can see it. So when Barack Obama was elected president in 2008, Democrats won overwhelming majorities at all levels, at state and at the national level and all branches. Okay, so legislative branch and the executive branch. 2 years later, the Democrats lose the majorities in the 2010 midterms. We might see that in 2018, where Republicans lose their majority 2 years after winning the White House. All right, now part of that is Nixon. Nixon had a strategy called the Solid Southern Strategy. And what he did is he realigned those white voters in the South who once had been supporters of the Democrats. And these people were disenchanted by the Democratic support for civil rights. So he came in with campaign promises of law and order, which we can kind of point to as dog whistles for, I'm going to support segregationist policies. Reagan comes in 1980s, and he's able to get evangelical support from the South. So now the South has realigned pretty solidly to the Republicans. Republican divisions and Democratic divisions still exist today, which cause this lack of long-term party dominance. So Republicans, you have establishment versus Tea Party or Trump supporters. And Democrats, you see the establishment Democrats butting heads with the liberal progressive lefts, like your Bernie bros. All right, so that's where we are today.